An elderly man was hunched over, mopping the ground floor lobby floor, in the middle of a busy morning at the headquarters of Undercover Logistics, the largest logistics corporation in the East. He moved slowly, steadily. The squeaking sound of the mop bucket's wheels echoed on the polished tile floor. No one paid him any mind. They swept past as if he were part of the wall, invisible, silent, non-existent. His name was Miles Bennett. On the chest of his old work shirt was a faded name tag, Custodian, Miles B. No title, no greetings, not a word of thanks. Just an old man cleaning up in a cold, powerful system. But there was something no one knew. 6 years ago, it was Miles himself who had sat in the boardroom on the 9th floor, the room with the walnut table, the large LED screen, and the leather chairs with nameplates for each attendee. He had once been the director of the Internal Risk Control Department, one of the people who held the power to decide on multi-million-dollar contracts. Now, he carried a torn pouch of cleaning cloths at his side, and no one remembered who he used to be. All that remained were his gaunt hands, still meticulously adjusting each chair in the conference room, as if holding on to the last shred of order in a world that had forgotten fairness. That morning, a new person walked in, a light blue shirt buttoned to the neck, a laptop clutched in his arms, his face young but his eyes looking as if they had seen more than his years. His name was Evan Clark, the new intern for the IT department. Amidst the employees bustling past, no one stopped to look at him, except for one person, the one hunched over, mopping the floor near the elevator. "Do you need directions to the HR department?" Miles asked in a low, calm voice. Evan was surprised, then nodded. Miles gave a slight smile, a smile that seemed all too familiar with the feeling of being forgotten. "Don't let Victor's expression scare you. Just go straight, then turn left. Second desk. Victor." That name would be repeated many times in Evan's journey later on. And that old man with the mop, he was the very first person to pull him out of the mire called office politics. No one knew it yet. But in just a few days, that encounter would lead to a confrontation that could topple the entire system Undercover Logistics had used to hide the truth for the past 6 years. And Evan, he would soon have to choose remain silent and survive, or stand up and possibly lose everything, but save something no one dared to name any more justice. Evan walked toward the HR desk with his backpack slung askew, a notebook clutched to his chest, his heart pounding. Everything here exuded a sleek coldness, the hurried footsteps, the perfectly ironed shirts, the scent of expensive cologne mixing with the sounds of printers and typing like a soulless symphony. He had just graduated from college, and this was his first day as an intern. He hadn't yet adapted to a world where every glance seemed to be measuring, assessing what class you belonged to, not what kind of person you were. Just as Evan was about to touch the handle of the HR office door, a voice, hard as cold steel, came from behind. "Who are you?" Evan turned around. A man in a light grey suit and a thin tie was holding a glass of iced coffee, with cold droplets of condensation on it. His eyes didn't ask. They judged. I'm Evan Clark, an intern for the IT department," Evan said, trying to keep his voice steady, but his tone still trembled. That man, Victor Hale, a mid-level manager from the 5th floor, looked him up and down, slowly, deliberately. "Your shirt isn't properly ironed. Your shoelace is untied. Your bag is too old. I hope your software isn't as messy as your choice of attire." The HR office fell silent. 2 employees who were working quietly lowered their eyes, as if they were all too used to such belittling remarks. Evan forced a smile, attempting to extend his hand politely. Victor did not shake it. He just took a sip of his coffee, then said in a monotone voice, "If you work under me, learn to be neater, and stay away from the custodian on the ground floor. Don't let him drag you down to the bottom with him." He turned and walked away as if he hadn't said anything important. Evan remained standing there, his hand hanging in mid-air, an indescribable feeling welling up inside him, not quite shame, not yet anger, but more like someone had just thrown a bucket of cold water in his face, and he hadn't even had a chance to take a proper breath. The first day, and he already knew this much here. Every smile had a sharp edge, and the only person who had ever smiled at him was the very one everyone said to stay away from. He sat down at his assigned desk, his hand gripping the strap of his backpack as if it were the only safe thing to hold on to. A piece of paper was handed to him, a list of internal system accounts, an instruction manual, a 4-week roadmap. Everything was impeccable, except for the feeling that he was stepping into a place where everyone wore a mask. Less than an hour later, he was assigned the task of connecting the main printer to the secondary server. He lowered his head and got to work, but Victor's words echoed in his mind, "Stay away from him." But why? That question began to lodge itself in Evan's mind, and the deeper it lodged, the more it made him unable to ignore the man cleaning the hallway, as if he were mopping away fragments of memory forgotten by the entire building. That afternoon, almost all the office employees had poured down to the cafeteria or gone out to buy food. The meeting tables were empty, the printers stopped running, and the internal system switched to power-saving mode. The atmosphere seemed to pause for a beat. Evan stayed behind, still struggling with a mess of network cables in the 4th floor tech room. His eyes were sore, his stomach was growling, but he had no desire to leave, perhaps because of the vague unease from his morning encounter with Victor, or perhaps because of the calm gaze of that strange custodian. As he stepped out into the hallway to get a glass of water, Evan happened to see him, Miles, cleaning the large conference room. The glass door was ajar. He didn't know someone was watching. Miles wasn't just cleaning. He adjusted each conference room chair to be perfectly aligned, gently turning the back of each one to a familiar curve. He smoothed the edge of the tablecloth as if preparing for an important meeting, not just cleaning up. His hand touched the surface of the table as if he had placed countless contracts on it before. That movement wasn't just a habit, it was a memory. Evan stopped at the door, watching in silence. There was something in the way he wiped each surface that made him think of precision, almost reverence, as if he wasn't cleaning but preserving something that was once sacred to him. In the small break room across the hall, two young employees were chatting, unaware that he was standing nearby. "Hey, did you know? I heard that Mr. Miles used to be a big boss back in the day." "Really? He looks more like a janitor at a school. Rumor is he was demoted for exposing something. But some people say he asked to be a custodian himself because of some illness. Whatever. Who knows? This place has a lot of stains, but no amount of mopping can get them clean." Miles said nothing. He stood silently, his hand pausing for less than a second, then continued wiping the last table as if he hadn't heard a thing. But Evan saw it clearly. For the first time, his eyes weren't looking at the dirt, but through the tabletop, through time, as if trying to hold on to something that was already broken. Later that afternoon, Evan was asked to check the main printer on the 6th floor. It had a paper jam. He fumbled with it for nearly 5 minutes, removing the tray, pulling out the paper, restarting it. But the machine still showed an error. Sweat trickled down the back of his neck. Then Miles's voice came from behind him, light as air. "Pull out tray 3. It's probably 160 GSM paper jammed in the second roller." Evan did as he was told, and the printer immediately started working again. "How did you know?" he asked, his eyes wide. Miles just shrugged. "I was the one who installed it." Evan stood frozen. A custodian installing the network printer for the internal system. But he didn't explain further. He just kept walking, as slowly as always, leaving Evan standing in the middle of the hallway, his mind full of questions. That evening, as Evan was double-checking the storage system map in the database, he suddenly remembered a detail. "Don't put anything on shelf E4. It got infested with termites in 2018. The wood hasn't been replaced." That's what Miles had said in the afternoon when he showed Evan the way to the basement warehouse. 1. Evan was still in high school that year, but Miles remembered every shelf, every number, every incident in the warehouse with perfect clarity. An ordinary person couldn't remember that. A person who only cleans certainly wouldn't know. But a person who once ran the entire risk control department could. Evan sat silently in front of his computer screen. What he felt now was not just surprise, but a powerful intuition. He wasn't who they said he was, and if he was being silent, there was definitely a reason. That night, Evan didn't go home right away. He stayed late after work, using the excuse of checking the internal server to request more time on the system. But he wasn't checking the hardware. For the first time, he typed a name into the internal search bar, Miles Bennett. A single result appeared. Name Miles B. Current position. Custodian. Start date 6 years ago. Reason for position change. Voluntary transfer request due to health reasons. That was it. No past data. No transfer records. No photos from previous meetings. As if his entire previous existence had been wiped clean. Evan frowned. That wasn't normal. The internal system always stored complete personnel information for a minimum of 10 years. Even employees who had left the company still had a file. He dug into the backup archive directory, a place few people touched unless they were system administrators. He sifted through old logs, hidden versions, and files with no clear titles. And then a picture appeared. The quality wasn't high, but it was clear. In the photo, Miles Bennett sat at the head of the 9th floor boardroom table, in a grey suit, with an internal audit chart in front of him. Behind him was the Stratus Core logo, Logistics, with a small line of text below his name, Director of Internal Risk Control. Evan felt his heart race. There was no longer any doubt. He wasn't just someone who used to have an important position. He was once the person who could make decisions for the entire system. So the question was no longer, who was he? But rather, why would someone like that disappear completely in the dim blue light of the monitor? Evan felt a chill run down his spine. It was as if he had accidentally pulled back a curtain, and underneath was a dense system of things no one was allowed to see. He looked back at the file, the only note at the bottom of the page, voluntary transfer request due to health reasons. A sentence too light. For a disappearance too heavy. Right then, Evan made a decision. He wouldn't stop here. He needed to find someone who had worked with him, someone who knew the past and hadn't been erased like Miles's file. He opened the employee list from 7 years ago, tracing back each name in the risk control department. One name caught his eye: Karen Brooks, Chief Accountant, 2015-2018. She had resigned, but her personal email address was still stored in the old contact data. Evan quickly wrote a message, his heart full of hesitation but his hand trembling uncontrollably. "Hello, Ms. Brooks. My name is Evan, an intern at the Stratus Core headquarters. I wanted to ask, do you remember someone named Miles Bennett?" He hit send, then waited. 10 minutes passed. No reply. 20 minutes. Still nothing. Just as Evan was about to turn off his computer, ding, an email arrived. Just one sentence. "I remember him very well. Meet me tomorrow morning. Small cafe on Fleetwood Street. 8:00 a.m. Evan stared at the words, and he knew tomorrow morning would be the turning point, because if Karen remembered and was willing to meet, perhaps Miles wasn't as alone in the truth as people wanted to believe. The next morning, the Boston sky was lightly foggy. No rain, but the air was as cold as a memory that hadn't had time to dry. Evan arrived at the small cafe on Fleetwood Street nearly 15 minutes early. He chose a table near the window, his hands twisting in his lap, his eyes fixed on the street outside as if waiting for something more important than work. 8 o'clock sharp. The door opened. A woman walked in, small in stature, with light grey hair and deep eyes hidden behind glasses. She looked around for a moment, her gaze landing on Evan. No need to ask. She walked over and sat down without a word of social greeting. Just a direct look, not cold, but filled with something deep. "Are you Evan?" "Yes, I'm an intern in the IT department. Karen Brooks, former chief accountant." But today, she was no longer the sharp accountant from the old files. In front of Evan was a woman who had walked out of that system, but still carried unhealed scars. "Do you remember Miles Bennett?" Karen looked at him for a long time, very deeply. It's not about remembering, it's about never forgetting. She gently placed her hands on her coffee cup, gripping it, as if she were still holding a secret that her hands must not let tremble. He was the kindest person I ever worked with. Her voice lowered, almost only for Evan to hear, and also the only one brave enough to speak the truth when all of us were afraid. Evan held his breath. What truth? Karen took a long breath. She looked straight into his eyes as if to make sure he was strong enough to hear the rest. Victor Hale, the man who is now your direct supervisor, that year. Miles discovered that he had altered the figures in an internal contract with a transportation partner. Evan felt the blood in his veins turn cold. Did Mr. Miles file a report? Yes, with evidence. At least 3 people signed as witnesses, including me. We thought there would be an internal investigation, but just 2 weeks later. She paused, her eyes turning red. Mr. Miles was transferred to the janitorial department. No investigation, no repercussions, no disciplinary action for anyone, and those involved, one by one, left or were forced to leave. Evan felt his heart being squeezed. So, why didn't he sue or go public? Karen quietly shook her head. Do you think an employee can fight a system without support from within? They deleted the report from the system. They forged signatures. And worst of all, she stopped, lowering her head. The only person with the power to stop it, the CEO at the time, did nothing. Maybe he didn't know. Or worse, he knew, but stayed silent. The cafe's atmosphere suddenly felt frozen. The sound of a spoon stirring gently at the next table sounded like a knife scraping. I stayed silent. Karen said, her eyes downcast. Not because I was a coward, but because my husband was undergoing treatment for terminal cancer at the time. I didn't dare risk my job, the insurance, the hospital bills, everything. I chose not to sign anything more, nor say anything. I just quietly withdrew. Evan didn't know how to react. In his mind was the image of Miles, hunched over, mopping the floor every morning, without complaint, without resentment, without demanding his honor back, as if living a second life with only one thing, silence, to survive. Karen placed her hand on his. If you came to me because you wanted to know the truth, now you know it. But if you think you can change anything, be prepared, because you are touching the coldest hardware of this company, collective silence. Evan nodded, not because he was sure he was strong enough, but because now he couldn't turn back. When he left the cafe, the sky was still grey, but in Evan's heart, everything had completely changed. He was no longer a curious intern. He was the only person in the current system who knew for a fact that Miles Bennett wasn't a janitor. He was someone who once dared to guard the door to keep deceit from flooding in. And now, perhaps he was the one who needed to open it again. That afternoon, Evan returned to the office in silence. Everyone was still walking around normally. The printers were still running. Internal messages still flickered on the screens. But for Evan, the atmosphere had changed color, colder, tighter, as if the entire building were watching his every breath. He had just entered his work area when he received a notification from the System Attachment Task Assignment. Special content. Prepare signed archival documents from Q1. Take them down to the basement storage, West Auxiliary storage area. Alone. Assigned by Victor Hale. Evan frowned. No reason, no support personnel, and no clear deadline. Just a curt, urgent order. But what made him most uneasy? The West Auxiliary storage, the very area he had heard Miles warn about having rotten stairs, no lights, and no danger signs. He stood silently for a few seconds, then quietly picked up the box of files and headed for the stairs. The basement door creaked open like a deadly whisper. The fluorescent lights flickered tiredly, casting a pale blue light on the walls like streaks of memory hidden under layers of dust. Evan stepped on the third stair. Crack. A faint cracking sound, like wood groaning under the weight of time. And then, snap. The rotten wooden step broke in two. Evan lost his balance. The box of files fell. He stumbled half forward. His hand flailed and caught the railing, just in time to keep from tumbling all the way down the dark staircase. Cold sweat broke out. His knee was scraped and torn. His heart was pounding erratically. Behind him, a familiar voice called out, no longer gentle as usual, but stern enough to be chilling. I reported that staircase was broken last year. No one fixed it. And now they send you down here, alone. It was Miles, holding a mop. His eyes seemed to pierce through the darkness. Evan turned, breathing heavily. Did they do it on purpose? Miles didn't answer. He bent down to help him pick up the files, his hands still calm, but his eyes heavy. When they both sat down on the bottom step, he only said, "Next time, if they give you a job in the basement, never go alone, especially when the reason has no name." Evan nodded, his heart still not settled. His eyes looked down at the crack in the rotten wood. A small crack was enough to kill someone if they fell in the right place, at the right time, and with no one to witness it. That night, Evan couldn't sleep at all. In his mind was the sound of the breaking step, the image of Victor sipping his cold coffee, the casually spoken words that were full of insinuation. People who know too much don't tend to last long here. He opened his laptop, accessed the internal system, found the assignment log. Basement documents. Task assigned to Evan Clark. Assigned by Victor Hale. Reason: urgent supply check. Time sent 02:13 a.m. No accompanying supervisor. No support requested. No tracking log. Evan sat silently, staring at the screen. Then he lifted his head, like someone who had just stepped out of the fog into a blinding light. This wasn't an accident. This was a warning. And if he continued, next time, there would be no railing to hold on to. His phone vibrated. A text from an unsaved number. Tomorrow morning, 6:45, West Corridor. There's something you need to see. Sender Miles. 6:45 in the morning. The entire Stratus Corps Logistics headquarters was still bathed in dim lights and the low hum of the starting systems. No one was talking. No one was walking around. There was only the sound of a light wind outside the ground floor glass doors and the faint fluorescent light shining on the west corridor, an area almost no one ever visited. Evan walked as quietly as he could, clutching his backpack to his chest. He didn't know what he was about to see, only that every step on the floor echoed like a drumbeat against his sweaty palms. At the far end of the corridor, Miles was already standing there. Without a word, he motioned for Evan to follow. They turned into the old technical area behind the maintenance room, where there was a faded wooden door with a nearly erased inscription, "Storage, not in use." Miles pulled out a rusty key and inserted it into the lock. Click. The door swung open. Inside was an old, dust-covered room, a warped wooden desk, an old cracked leather chair, and on the tabletop, a picture frame, face down. Miles picked up the frame and turned it over. In the faded photo, he sat in the center, surrounded by his internal control team from back then. Everyone was smiling, younger than they were now, unaware of what was to come. "This used to be my office," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, "before they took everything back." Evan looked around the room, the old nail holes in the wall, where awards and certificates once hung, the worn-out carpets that were still kept clean. Everything was like a memory buried alive, and he was the only one who still came to clean it every morning before work. The day I discovered Victor had altered the numbers in the contract with the Western partner, he said, his eyes not leaving the photo. I reported it. Enough evidence, enough signatures, but then he pointed to a stain on the wall where his nameplate used to hang. 2 weeks later, I was transferred to the maintenance crew. No reason, no explanation, and everyone who signed that report with me gradually disappeared. Evan gripped his backpack strap tightly. Didn't they investigate at all? Miles gave a small smile, not a happy one. There's nothing to investigate if the records are deleted. And if the person who approves the investigation order is the regional director, then everything is considered valid, as if I had never been present in any meeting. Evan sank onto the old leather chair, his eyes fixed on the photo. "Don't you regret it?" Miles was silent for a moment. Then he nodded, as lightly as a breath. "I don't regret speaking up. I only regret that I couldn't protect anyone." That night, Evan returned to the office once again. No one knew. He brought a small camera with him, the kind used for monitoring pets but with high resolution, a wide angle, and a wireless connection. He slipped into Miles's old room. In the corner of the wall near the old router, there was an internet jack that was still quietly active, unnoticed by anyone. He mounted the camera there, aimed at the door. "If anyone comes in or out after hours, I'll know." Evan left, camouflaging everything just as it was. The next morning, a notification from the camera app popped up. Motion detected. 11:36 p.m. Evan's heart pounded. He opened the video clip. The door opened. A man walked in, light grey shirt, holding a stack of documents. He didn't turn on the light. The light from the hallway was enough to see his face clearly. Victor Hale. He went straight to the wooden cabinet against the wall, opened a drawer, and stuffed the documents inside. He didn't check for cameras, not a hint of fear. as if he had done this more than once. Then he left. The door closed. Evan stared at the video, sweat beading on the back of his shirt. It's not just a threat anymore. This is action. And now Evan had something Miles hadn't had for the past 6 years. Proof. On Tuesday morning, Evan arrived at the office earlier than usual. Too early. The entire floor was still silent. No typing sounds, no people, just the dim white lights and the distant hum of the air conditioner. In his hand was a set of technical keys borrowed from the maintenance department under the pretext of checking the network connection cabinet on the second floor. But his real destination was the old room that Miles had once called the Forgotten Office. The wooden door opened. Evan stepped inside, taking a deep breath. The space was just as it was yesterday. Dusty, silent, the picture frame lying face down on the table. He approached the cabinet where Victor had hidden the documents, the third drawer on the right. A simple lock, the kind used in the old days. Evan inserted the key, his hand trembling slightly. Click. The door swung open. Inside was a black file folder. No label, no name. As if it didn't exist. Evan pulled out the file, placed it on the table, and flipped to the first page. His eyes widened. Internal Financial Violation Report submitted by Miles Bennett. Date June 12th, 6 years ago, confirmed by Denise Holloway. Internal Audit. Mark Irving, Legal. Karen Brooks, Chief Accountant. The following pages were filled with accounting documents, sales contracts, budget reports, all with handwritten notes, color-coded marks, and especially a detailed analysis of the manipulation of internal costs to inflate profits. Victor's name appeared frequently. Transferred employee training budget to outsourcing category to reduce accountability. Reclassified maintenance contracts to legitimize Bu Ming Na Ji Chu. Changed frequency of inspection reports without board approval. Line by line, piece by piece of evidence. All clear. No longer a rumor. No longer a one-sided story. Miles was right, and Victor had hidden it all. Evan sat silently. His heart pounded. His hands clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. Not because he was afraid, but because for the first time in his life, he felt he was touching something real. Even if it was mired in filth. He closed the file, put it back in the cabinet, and locked it as before. But this time, he didn't leave right away. He stood there, his hand on the cabinet handle, his head bowed low. A long, heavy breath. This had been going on for 6 years. And no one dared to touch it. Evan walked out of the room, heading straight for the lobby. Miles was cleaning the front glass door. Slow movements, a somber gaze. Evan approached him. His voice was low, but clear. I saw it. The report. The signatures. Everything. Miles stopped his work, his head still bowed. I have a video of Victor hiding the documents, and pictures of the documents in the cabinet. We can do something. He slowly looked up. His eyes met Evan's, a gaze no longer avoidant. "And then what? You'll take it to the board of directors, then walk into the office like nothing happened and sit in the chair that hasn't been cleaned in 6 years." Evan was silent. Not because he had no answer, but because for the first time he understood the price of truth. It wasn't just painful. It was lonely. It was laughed at. And it was erased. Miles put down the mop, his hands clasped behind his back. His voice remained calm. "I don't need the title back. I don't need that chair. I just need one person to remember that I was right." Evan nodded, not with words, but with red-rimmed eyes and a tight grip on his backpack strap. Because from this moment on, he was no longer an outsider. He was a witness, the one holding the key. And this time, Miles would not fight alone. That afternoon, as Evan returned to his desk, before he could even turn on his computer, a message popped up on his screen. "Victor Hale. My office. 9:22. Don't be late." Just 4 words. No subject, no reason. But it didn't need more than that, because Evan already knew this wasn't a conversation. This was a summons. He took a deep breath, a long breath to keep his hands from shaking. Inside, 100 questions raced, but behind them was a strange clarity. This was the moment he had to choose, fear or confrontation. 9:22. Evan stood in front of Victor's office. He knocked twice. "Come in." The voice was as cold as ice. Victor was already sitting behind his desk, his shirt perfectly pressed, his tie slightly askew as if to deliberately show a calculated carelessness. On the desk was a smoothie, pale yellow, cool, and a file folder, face down, with no label. Evan stepped in, gently closing the door behind him. Victor smiled, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "I checked your background." Evan remained silent. He knew to let him speak first. Nothing special, but no black marks either. "You know, that kind of record often makes people complacent." He held up the smoothie, a belated welcome gift, mango and banana. "Nothing strange in it, I swear." Then he laughed. But Evan didn't laugh. He took the drink, but didn't drink it. He set it down on the table. His gaze was direct. Victor nodded slightly, raising an eyebrow. "I heard you have an interest in the old storage archives." Evan didn't react. He didn't confirm or deny. Victor rested his hands on the desk, leaning forward slightly, his voice lowered. "You know, Evan, in this company, knowing too much isn't always a good thing, especially things that other people have tried to bury." A short silence, cold, sharp as a razor blade grazing the skin. Evan replied, slowly, "I'm not very good at pretending not to see things." Victor chuckled softly, a soundless laugh, just a movement of his lips and tongue. "So, the ideal type to become a problem." He opened the file folder on his desk. Inside was a transfer contract, Seattle, a new branch, Title assistant, IT manager, salary double the current one, housing assistance, relocation package. Victor turned the contract around, pushing it toward Evan. You see, I'm a practical man. You can go. Everything will be smooth. It's better than not fitting in with the current work environment. A threat wrapped in honeyed words. His eyes didn't blink. Evan looked at the contract. His eyes scanned quickly over each line, each clause, then stopped at the final clause. No complaints, no investigations, no disclosure of known internal information. He took a deep breath, then slowly pushed the contract back. I'm not going anywhere. Not a raised voice, not indignant, but enough to not be considered naive. Victor stopped smiling. The rhythmic tapping of his hand on the desk suddenly ceased. You just turned down a big opportunity. Evan stood up. His eyes never left his. I came here to learn.
And I've learned more than I expected, especially about who really runs this place. Victor's face tightened slightly. The smile disappeared, as if a switch had been flipped. What do you think you have in your hand? A video, documents, messages. All of that can be deleted. Evan didn't reply. He just turned, his hand on the doorknob. Maybe. But I'm not alone anymore. The door closed behind him. No slam, no bang. Just the sound of a young person who had chosen not to be silent. And from that moment, Evan knew every step he took from now on would be watched. Every email, every call, every glance from a stranger could be a trap. But this time, he wouldn't back down. That afternoon, Evan didn't go home. He quietly took the untouched smoothie to the break room behind the kitchen, a place almost no one visited during lunch hour. An old room with scratched wooden tables and chairs, a vending machine humming tiredly. Evan sat there, his hands clasped together. His eyes were tense, looking down at the floor. In his mind was a single question, repeating over and over. If they silenced Miles, who else was erased from history? The door opened slightly. Miles walked in, still in his custodian uniform, still with a mop in his hand. But this time, his eyes were different. No longer quietly avoidant, but the eyes of someone who knew it was time to stop turning away. He sat down opposite him, said nothing. Evan looked at him. You know, don't you, about the transfer? Miles nodded slightly. I was once invited in a similar way. At the time, I thought, if I don't agree to move, will they sink me faster? Evan opened his phone, showing him the video Victor sneaking into the old room in the middle of the night, carrying documents. Miles looked at the screen. His eyes narrowed slightly, his hand holding it tightly as if afraid the video would disappear. He said nothing, but the confirmation in his eyes was all too clear. If we take this to the executive board, Evan said softly, Victor can't deny it. Miles sighed. You're naive. Evan, that board, many of them turned a blind eye when I was sent to mop floors. What would they do differently this time? Evan was thoughtful, then replied, "But now we have something you never had technical evidence. Videos, photos, scanned documents, all backed up. And you're not alone anymore." Miles sat up straight. "You need someone who knows their way around the system, someone who wrote those reports, someone who was pushed to the margins. I know them." He took a small, old, folded piece of paper from his pocket. He opened it. 7 names. The people who had signed the original report, the ones who had chosen to stand with the truth, then disappeared. Evan took the paper. His hand trembled slightly. "These are the people who can verify everything." Miles nodded. Denise Holloway, internal audit. Mark Irving, legal. Eleanor Price, South Region admin manager. And 4 others. Some have disappeared. Some I don't know if they dare to speak up anymore. But if just one of them agrees to confirm again, this won't be in your hands or mine alone. Evan gripped the paper tightly. In his eyes, for the first time, there was not just determination, but something even stronger meaning. Not just to protect Mr. Miles, not just to counter Victor, but to prove silence is not the default. And if one person starts, there will be a second, then a third, and then a system will have to bow its head, Miles said softly, as if to himself. "You remind me that I never lost. I just paused to wait for the right person." Evan nodded. "And I think you just found that person." That night, Evan didn't go home. He sat in his car, parked in a deserted lot about 5 blocks from the company headquarters. In his hand was the list of 7 names, the people who had signed the report accusing Victor 6 years ago, now disappeared from the personnel system. The corner of the paper was yellowed, the ink slightly smeared at the bottom corner. Miles's handwriting, but each stroke seemed etched into memory. Denise Holloway, internal audit. Mark Irving, legal. Eleanor Price, admin South Region, and 4 others. Evan opened his laptop, searching for each person in turn. Denise Holloway, no email, no internal file. LinkedIn page. User does not exist. Evan bit his lip, moved on to the second person. Mark Irving. Found an old news item. Mark Irving left the legal profession for mental health reasons. No picture, no updates. Just a faint line among thousands of other meaningless names on Google. Evan sat silently. His heart sank. It felt as if each person on the list was slowly dissolving into darkness, leaving behind nothing but a sense of overwhelming helplessness. He clicked on the next name, Eleanor Price. Found, still employed. Work address, South Bay branch, more than a 2-hour drive from Boston. Title, Human Resources Support Manager. Latest update. 2 months ago, a photo of her with a group of elderly employees cutting a birthday cake in a small suburban office. Evan let out a sharp breath, the first ray of light in this murky journey. He didn't hesitate. He set off immediately. 2 hours later, Evan stood in front of the South Bay branch headquarters, a modest building in an old industrial park. The sun had set, leaving only the street lights to cast a glow on the grey sidewalk. The atmosphere was quiet, simple, no security gates, no managers with forced smiles. Evan walked in. A woman in her 50s, her hair tied back low, was checking the time clock. He recognized her immediately. Her face was still the same as in her profile picture. Only her eyes were more sunken, but they still held a strange alertness. He approached her, lowering his voice. "Excuse me, are you Eleanor Price?" She was slightly startled. She looked up. "Who's asking?" Evan pulled out his employee ID, the kind for interns, and held it out. "I'm Evan Clark, an intern at the main headquarters. I'm here because of Mr. Miles Bennett." No one said anything for the next 5 seconds. Eleanor looked at Evan as if she had just heard a name no one had dared to mention for the past 6 years. Then she nodded. "Follow me." They went into a small room behind the employee break area. She closed the door. She didn't turn on the light. She just let the light from the hallway filter in. She sat down. She didn't ask Evan anything. She just took out a worn-out cloth wallet from her pocket, opened it, pulled out an old folded piece of paper. "I kept this because I knew one day someone would ask again." She opened the paper. A copy of the minutes of an internal meeting, with the content, "Miles Bennett is to be transferred for violating internal reporting procedures." But on the last line, handwritten, very small, "Do not forward this file to the legal department." Evan stared at that line of text, then looked at her. They knew he was right, and still chose to bury him. Eleanor nodded slightly. Her voice trembled. "My husband was undergoing cancer treatment at the time. I couldn't lose my job. I didn't sign anything more. I didn't help them. But I didn't help him either." She looked straight at Evan. "But if today is the day to make things right, then I choose to make things right now." Evan said nothing. But in his heart, one thing rang clear. For the first time in 6 years, someone in the system had spoken up, and the truth had just been brought back to life. 3 days later, on the 18th floor, the main headquarters of Stratus Core Logistics, Alan Rivera, the current CEO, sat alone in his glass-walled office. It was raining lightly outside, but in his heart, a fierce storm was brewing. On his laptop screen was an email received at 6 in the morning from riot@internmail.com, subject regarding Miles Bennett and things that were never made public. Attachment truth 01. Zip. He opened the file. In order. They were the altered financial report. A video of Victor breaking into the records room after hours. A picture of the meeting minutes with the note, "Do not forward to legal." A scanned copy of Eleanor's statement. A list of related personnel who had disappeared from the system. The last page was a picture of his own digital signature from 6 years ago, attached to the disciplinary action against Miles Bennett that he had never signed. Alan shot to his feet. His hands clenched into fists. They used my own name to bury the truth. 9:00 a.m. A message was sent to all department heads, senior managers, and branch leaders. Emergency meeting, Room A, fifth floor. No one is to be absent. Everyone was bewildered. The message had no reason, no subject. The fifth floor meeting room, a place that hadn't been used in a long time, was lit up for the first time again. The seats quickly filled. The air was tense as a guitar string. Victor Hale walked in 3 minutes late, still with his sneering smile, his arrogant stride. He whispered to the person next to him, another one of these pointless meetings. What a waste of time. The door opened. Alan Rivera walked in, holding a thick black file. Not a word of greeting, not a smile. He connected his laptop to the projector and played the video. Victor walking into the old room in the middle of the night, opening the cabinet and putting away the documents. The entire room fell silent. Alan looked around, his voice low but resonant. I'm not here to regain your trust. I'm here to clean up. He switched to the next slide, the meeting minutes with the note, "Do not forward file to legal." The next slide, a scanned copy of the disciplinary action against Miles Bennett with Alan's own signature. "This is my signature," he said, "but I never signed this document." The atmosphere in the room was suffocatingly heavy. Eleanor, sitting in a far corner, stood up. Her voice trembled, but was firm. "I confirm. Walter, no. Miles was right. And we were wrong. I witnessed it." Victor jumped to his feet, his eyes wide. "You have no right to dig up the past. I kept this company running when all of you were just playing moral theater." Alan stepped forward, just one step, but it was like a verdict. "You didn't keep the company running. You buried justice." He pulled an envelope from the file, placing it on the table in front of Victor. "This is your suspension notice, effective immediately. All internal accounts, access rights, and company property are permanently revoked." Victor's face turned pale. He roared, "Do you think this is the end of it?" Alan didn't shout. He just replied calmly, but with a chilling sharpness, "No, this is not the end. This is the beginning." Victor looked around. No more supportive gazes, only tired faces that had been silent for too long. He turned and stumbled out of the room, like a beast stripped of its last layer of power. The door closed gently, but it echoed like a sentence. Alan turned back to everyone. "I know, no one here is entirely innocent, but I also believe no one is beyond redemption. Starting today, all internal reports will be reviewed again. No one, I repeat, no one has the right to make anyone else invisible." Outside the door, Miles Bennett stood silently, the mop still in his hand. He didn't enter the room. He just gave a single nod, like an old father who had just seen his child choose the right path. No need for a title, no need for revenge, just for the truth to be seen. After that meeting, no internal newsletter was issued, no press conference, no media statement. There was only a single line in the weekend newsletter for Stratus Core employees starting next week. The entire internal complaint mechanism will be independently monitored by the CEO. Cases of previous demotions or transfers without clear reasons will be reviewed under a reverse fairness policy. And in the corner of the ground floor technical area, where Mr. Miles still came every morning, a private meeting took place. Alan Rivera, without an assistant, without a tie, just holding a cream-colored envelope. Inside was a decision, reinstatement of the Director of Internal Control position, old salary, old office, new team. Alan placed the paper in Miles's hand. I want you to come back. Not to mop floors, but to clean up the system that has rotted from within. Miles was silent for a long time. Then he gently folded the decision, handed it back. I don't need a title to know who I am. Alan didn't object. He just asked softly, So, what do you need? Miles looked out the window, where the early morning sun shone down on the stone benches outside. I need a small room, a desk, and a nameplate with no title. A place for those who are no longer young, no longer strong, but still have a conscience. 2 weeks later, in a far corner of the headquarters campus, a new room was set up. No grand signs, no company logo, just a hand-carved wooden plaque, the Haven Room, where those who were forgotten get to start again. Inside, there were no luxurious leather chairs, just wooden desks, old computers, and soft yellow light. The people who entered all had one thing in common: they were once considered to have no value. An old woman who was let go for being too slow. A single father who was fired for missing a meeting to take his child to the hospital. A young man who had failed his probation simply because he answered questions more honestly than people wanted. And there, Miles Bennett, with no title, quietly taught them how to search internal databases, write application emails, organize paperwork, and answer phones like a true professional. He didn't preach, he just told stories. I used to sit on the 9th floor. Then I was pushed down to the basement. But in truth, value isn't on any floor. It's in whether we can still hold on to kindness, in silence. 3 months later, a new policy was implemented, company-wide second path policy. Any employee previously terminated for non-serious reasons has the right to apply for a re-evaluation. Each branch must have a minimum of 1 reintegration slot per quarter. Those who were once erased from the system will be sought out and invited for a re-interview with a fair committee. Special provision: former employees who contributed to internal reports will be protected by an anti-retaliation clause. At the bottom of the policy, the signature line was not just Alan Rivera, CEO, but also a small line in italics. We can't start over from the beginning, but we can start from today, with respect. One late afternoon, Evan stopped by the Haven Room. Inside, Mr. Miles was teaching a group of older adults how to write a cover letter in a sincere tone. Evan sat down, not to ask, but to listen, and when the class ended, a shy young man approached Miles. Old t-shirt, eyes sunken from lack of sleep. I used to be a delivery driver for the company. One time I didn't deliver on time because I got lost, and I lost my job. No one asked. No one listened. I disappeared as if I never existed. Miles placed a hand on his shoulder. "What's your name, Liam?" "Well, Liam, today you start over. Here, no one looks at you for your past mistakes. Here, people look at each other with opportunity." In the golden afternoon light, Evan, Miles, and those who were once left behind were now writing the first pages for others, not with a loud voice, but with silent, patient actions. And the system that once forgot them was now learning to listen again.